Hi, my name is Courtney. I am a biology education researcher, so I fall into the student category and an aspiring educator category and very much in the researcher category. Today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some work that I did while I was an undergrad. This served as my undergraduate thesis. I finished my undergraduate degree in December of 2024, and I really want to start by asking you all a question. Can you raise your hand if you have either been a student at a community college, if you have ever been an instructor of community college students, or perhaps instructed a student who transferred from a community college, or have collaborated with people in community college? So many hands are up, right? And I think that's a really cool thing. I think that community colleges have had such a strong impact on my life and have clearly impacted all of our careers and our pursuits in some way. And to share just a little bit of background, I'm a very proud community college graduate of Harford Community College in Harford County, Maryland, and love that school. And I tried college out of high school, and I failed miserably. And after that, I spent 5 years in the military. And when I got out of the military, I said, well, I don't know what to do next. And Harford Community College was right down the street. And it was at that community college that I realized I can be a scientist. I can pursue science. And after I got to transfer to Cornell University, I found out that discipline-based education research is a thing. And that led me to be really curious about community college biology students. So when I went into the literature for the first time, I saw some really interesting things. I found that, okay, community colleges are this unique and vital piece of our education system, and that community colleges are more likely to enroll students who come from low socioeconomic backgrounds and serve a higher proportion of students who come from marginalized demographics in areas such as race or gender. Personally, I'm a disabled military veteran who is a non-traditional student, so this really connected with me, and reading this literature really hit home. And then I found out that 48% of all undergraduates studying STEM in the US have previously attended community colleges. But when we go into the biology education literature, we see that only roughly 6% of the biology education literature focuses on these community college students. So I got obsessed with the question, how do we best serve this population? And I thought, okay, well, in order to best serve this population, we have to think about how they're learning, and that's where we've seen this already today. Vision and change. So vision and change establishes these 5 core concepts and says, conceptually, students should understand these 5 by the time they finish a 4-year degree program. And in response to this publication, an assessment was built, the Gen Biomaps assessment. And the Gen Biomaps assessment provides us with a few key things upon a student's completion of it. That would be their overall score on the assessment, and also a score for each of those 5 core concepts. And then at the end of the assessment, there's also this demographic survey that surveys these 5 demographic categories that are in the bubbles at the bottom. And when this assessment was published, they had a multiple iterative implementation that was this big national study. And they found a few things. They found that students' conceptual understanding does improve over time, over the course of a 4-year degree. They also found that students scored lowest, notably low, in the information flow core concept and the items that tested that. And that students scored notably higher on questions relating to the systems core concept. And when they took the information that they got from the demographic survey that surveys these 5 demographic categories, they found that there were disparities between marginalized and non-marginalized students within each of these groups. specifically in these 4 categories. Within the gender, race, parent education, and first language category, those disparities were present. And what really got me is that 90% of their sample were students at 4-year institutions. So I got very curious. I got very curious about, okay, these trends are very important to know, but can we learn more about how these trends look at 2-year institutions? So we developed the following questions. We looked at the first research question saying, how are community college students performing across these 5 core concepts? And also, we wanted to know if the institutional, course, and student level variables, those demographic variables, contribute to the variation in their score on this assessment and thus their conceptual understanding. So to look at our first research question, we used linear modeling, and we used linear modeling to really look at ask the question, are there differences in scores in these 5 core concepts? So we started by building our model where we really looked at determining if there are differences between how students scored across the 5. And we also wanted to control for these random effects. We wanted to control for the variance that may be presented by differences in institution and differences in instructor, or differences across classes. And after some statistical tests, we figured out that those random effects that are bolded should be included in our model, that there was variation to control for in our model. So when we ran this model, we found that there was a difference in student scores across these core concepts. So to orient to our axes really quickly, on our y-axis we have our effect size, our score on the assessment, and on our x-axis, if the letters are the same, there's no significant difference. So we really didn't see any significant difference here between student scores on the evolution, structure, function, and energy and matter core concepts. And we found that on the systems core concept, students were scoring significantly higher. And on the information flow core concept, to say that 10 times fast, that students were scoring lower. Now, to look at our second research question, we adopted a method that honestly was the method that taught me how to code in RStudio, so thank you, Dr. Theobald, for that. And what we did was we used this modeling. We really wanted to look at, okay, the Gen Biomap score represents a student's overall score, and then we wanted to see what is the model that best explains the variance in this overall score. And we started with all of our fixed effects, those demographic categories. And then we also wanted to, we ran similar tests to the first research question, looking at is significant variance being explained by these random effects, and should we control for it? And we did find that there was variance between students at different institutions who had different instructors and were in different classes, so we controlled for those in our model. And we found that multiple fixed effects, multiple of those demographic categories did predict conceptual understanding significantly in the model that was the best fit. First, we found a significant difference within the gender category. We found significant differences within the race category. We also found significant differences within the major versus non-major category within the model that best fit our data. So we're going to zoom out just a little bit. So our first research question, going back to that initial curiosity about do these trends hold between 2 and 4 year institutions, we really see something similar, right? We see information flow is lower and we see that systems is higher. And then when we look at the second research question, that's where we really started to go, okay, we're seeing differences here. and started really having interesting discussions about why. And you'll notice that the fact that on the community college side of this, that we didn't find any disparity between students whose parents had and hadn't gone to college before. And we didn't find disparity within the groups of students who speak English as a first language or not. So when we put all of these conclusions together, in terms of this symposium, we really had a discussion about, okay, how do we use open science as a solution to specifically further support community college biology students? And personally, I've reflected on this a bunch, and I see it as doing two things. And these are two things that have already been talked about today. One is collaboration, and one is building and using tools. So first, we're gonna continue to show UNESCO's definition of open science, or at least part of it, and the importance of increasing scientific collaborations, and the part where UNESCO says beyond the traditional scientific community really hit home, because I don't think that a lot of people see community colleges at first glance as always having been part of that traditional scientific community, but the reality is they are. Community college is where I got my first research experience. And in order to really collaborate, I think that biology education researchers, I think that biology educators across 4-year schools and 2-year schools and everything in between, all these different stakeholders that Sam mentioned earlier should come together and really have discussions about how can we use our expertise to work together. And I think community-based participatory research is a really good framework to do this, where instead of having discussions about, well, they did or didn't do this, or they did or didn't do that, why are we not coming into the room together and sitting down and having a discussion? Because I think once we do that, we can build some tools. And starting with concept inventories, I think that there are so many concept inventories out there, and they're so valuable. But I also think that the question should be asked, are we designing concept inventories that are specific to community college contexts? So are we really measuring things that are specific to community college students? Have we asked community college educators, what do you think should be measured? And then moving into OERs, I know that there's been lots of discussion about OERs today, but when you look at community college contexts and you look at smaller class sizes, you look at lower resource classrooms, you look at instructors who have massive teaching loads. How are we designing OERs to be optimal for those environments? And lastly, when we put these two together, and this admittedly kind of got a little full circle for me, is I went, wait a minute, I was an undergraduate, I joined a biology education research lab. The Gen Biomaps is an open access concept inventory. It's an assessment that you can take online and you can have your students take online, and then you get a report back with your students' results. And those are the data that we used to do this project. And when I put all of that together, I realized that I was an undergraduate a year ago, and I got to publish my first paper last week because these resources were available, right? And I really do encourage people to go read it because it's a great paper. And I don't have nearly enough time to thank the people who all have contributed to my growth as a researcher, but also to this work directly. Big thanks to Dave Esparza and Dr. Michelle Smith at Cornell for feeding into me as a bioed researcher, but also thank you to Dr. Lemary, whose lab I will be joining as a PhD student in the fall at Texas Tech, and the many collaborators and participants that helped with this work. So with that, I will take some questions.
All right, I see a question right in the middle. The microphone is coming your way. Thank you for that wonderful talk. I do think that there's a lot of opportunities in the community college world that we're not fully taking advantage of. We have a study that data collection finished this week that I made sure that we included. A third of our data set is from community colleges because that is where many students are, and that it's not adequately studied.
It is really important.
No, you're an inspiration to me. I actually just posted about you on Instagram that you went from a community college into Cornell, and look at you now, and you're doing a postbac. So for me, it's gorgeous. But I did want to ask you about a couple of things. When you mentioned about designing instruments, that struck a nerve with me, because I remember several years ago going to a conference where folks had developed an instrument for assessing adjunct faculty. And I was very excited because my school, Resource Limited, had a lot of adjunct faculty at the time. And the folks who had developed the instrument were at a school where there were no adjunct faculty. They hadn't involved adjunct faculty in making the instrument. They hadn't tested it with adjunct. I was appalled. And so the fact that you're going there at least inspires me. But the second thing I wanted to say was, with respect to the four-year schools, among the four-year schools, did you find any models of excellence where they were handling the vision and change and implementation better than perhaps other schools? So were there any kind of outliers in the four-year schools that were doing a good job with addressing the needs and the wants for those community college students? And I'm thinking of CUNY, where I used to work. Some of those schools are doing a good job, and I was just wondering if you had any examples.
So I don't have a specific example from this four-year study. That was in 2019. That was the publication of the Gen Biomaps assessment, Couch et al. It's an excellent paper. But I can say that Vision and Change was implemented at a college level while I was at Cornell, and I got to talk to some of the educational strategy people involved in that. I know that its effectiveness of implementation is on a bell curve, right? And I don't think that I know enough to speak any more on that, but I appreciate it.
All right, do we have any other questions? I see one on the end here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. This is such important work. I had a question about your thoughts. I just wanted to know your thoughts on why there might be differences or the patterns that you see, especially at a community college. Wanted to learn more about why you think that is. Like how the learning is different, what feels, and how you connect that to the open resources that are available, like what could be helpful to integrate in the classes.
I think that's an excellent question. I think that there's a big mystery posed by the right side of this slide. I think I wrote on my next slide very vaguely that community colleges may be creating unique infrastructures for students who speak English as a second language and first generation students. I don't know. I think that community college, it's in the data, it's in the analysis, right? But I think that is where we have to go and ask those questions of community college faculty, of community college instructors, of community college advisors and administrators, and all the stakeholders involved. And I think once we get some of those answers, then the open science, and I would say the open education side of open science, comes in where we can then say, all right, let's support and fund and provide paths for these people who are contributing to unique infrastructures to not only further explore why they're happening and how they're happening, but how we can take those things and we can replicate them all over the place.
Really interesting talk, thank you. I just wanted to mention the Community College Consortium for OER, which I mentioned earlier too, because I feel like the ground zero movement for open educational resources and open ed was in the community colleges in particular, and they developed like so many resources about thinking about community colleges and their particular challenges, and just wondering if you included that community in your work or have connected with the CCC OER, because there's so many people in the open ed movement that came more from community colleges than they come from four-year institutions.
Absolutely. So I had discussions. So this work just finished, I guess. Finished. Does work really ever finish? After 2 years, and over the course of those 2 years of going through this process, I got to have discussions with, I think his name is James Hewlett. If I said that name wrong, that's my mistake. At Sabre East last year, up in Rochester, New York. And one of my own community college instructors from Harvard Community College, Jackie Madden, she works with the CPhages project and has helped connect me with all these people and all these papers. And the community is very rich. And as a discipline-based education researcher, I think that there might be a disconnect between this super rich community college community and networks and groups of people like that and in our community, and let's bridge that gap. Let's do something about that. That's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. The community colleges are lucky to have you in their corner.
Thanks.